Hi, JKN here, and in this video we're going to have a look at the rarest knife finishes. Not knives, knife finishes. Now there is so much to talk about this topic that I will have to make two parts of this video, so bear with me. We are obviously going to factor in specific conditions, stat track variations, and so on and so forth. So without getting too much off track, let's get right into it. So let's start with the most known rare knife finish, the StatTrak Factory New Crimson Web. This is a staple in CSGO which has been around since 2013, so it's safe to say that this is one of the oldest knife finishes that are still highly sought after till this very day. And with good reason, as these things are stupidly hard to get in StatTrak Factory New conditions. Let's factor in the odds. The odds to get a knife from a case in the first place is 1 in 384. The odds of that knife being a Crimson Web is 1 in 13. The odds of that Crimson Web being a factory new one is 1 in 66 due to the flow being capped at 0.06. And lastly, the odds of that factory new Crimson Web knife being in StatTrak is 1 in 10. So add that all up and your probability to unbox a StatTrak factory new Crimson Web knife is 1 in 8,286,720. Not really in our favor. So it's no surprise that these things are really rare and are really hard to get your hands on. If you include the shattered web and fracture case that contain the quote-unquote new shattered web knives and Crimson Web finishes, Crimson Webs have been around for 6 or so years, and yet still we have a very small quantity of these things. For instance, let's take the Karambit as an example. After being available to unbox since the very first CSGO case, the CSGO weapon case, till the Winter Offensive case, there are only 6 of these Karambits in existence. The Bayonet is even rare, the regular one, with only 2 ever being unboxed, whilst also being available from the same cases as the Karambit. Safe to say, if you have any of these knives, especially if they aren't duped, video coming on that topic, you have one of the rarest knives in the entire game. Next on the list is the Chroma case, more specifically a knife finish that was introduced with it, the Ultraviolet. This finish is very simple, with the blade being matte black and the handle being violet as the name suggests. These things, even being one of the newer finishes on this list, are still very hard to get and come across in StatTrak Factory New, because just like the Crimson Webs, the flow caps at 0.06. So the odds of you unboxing one of these is pretty slim. Now since the Chroma case has fewer knife finishes, you do have a slightly higher shot at getting an Ultraviolet. But if you're after the cream of the crop, your odds are still 1 in 3,824,640. So better than the Crimson Webs, still very much near impossible to achieve, unfortunately. The shocker is that these things, like mentioned, are available from every case that was released between the Chroma case and the Prisma 2 case. So within that time frame, when there were far more players compared to the entire time frame when the Crimson Webs were dropping, specifically the cases they were available in, surely there would be far more StatTrak Factory New Ultraviolets, but you'd be sorely mistaken. Let's take the Bowie knife as an example. It is a 1 of 9. The Flip knife is a 1 of 6, and the M9 bayonet is a literal 1 of 1 as of making of this video. So it's safe to assume that this finish, even though it should be more common than the Crimson Web, it's still a knife that you're probably never going to see in game, let alone own one. Here's one of my most favorite knife finishes, the StatTrak Factory New Knight. Like the Crimson Web knives, it is also part of the OG knife finishes, with it being available to unbox since the very first case, the CSGO weapon case, a case which was released all the way back in August 2013. These knives can be unboxed in the Operation Wildfire case, a case that was released in February of 2016, and obviously these knives can be unboxed from every case that came before that. Since these were the early days of CS, it's not surprising to know that there aren't many of these knight skins around in StatTrak Factory New, because there was simply a much lower player base back then, so the cases where these knights are contained in weren't dropping as frequently as the cases now. To add more rarity to the finish, the knight knives have been replaced with the Night Stripe finish, which is basically a dark urban mask. And my guess as to why the finish was altered would be simply that the knives were either too similar to the ultraviolets or that the knives were too basic. But no one really knows the true answer to that question other than Valve themselves. So even though not many people would bat an eye at this finish as it looks too boring for most, those people like me that really like simple finishes in certain cases, they find the old Night Knife skin to be very nice and eye-catching. And since the Night Knives have been discontinued, assuming there won't be any unboxed in StatTrak Factory New, there will be now a fixed amount of them from now on. So it is safe to assume that there won't be that many available in StatTrak Factory New conditions in the future. Since the Night Knives can be found in almost every case as the Crimsons, the odds are the same 1 in 8,286,720 due to the Night Knives float also being kept at 0.06. I think you're starting to see a pattern here. Now when it comes to quantity, it is a lot worse. The Night is so much rarer than the Crimson Web. For instance, there are only 3 StatTrak Factory New Flip Knights, 7 Bowie knives, 4 M9 Bayonets, 3 of which are on banned accounts, so this knife can already be considered a 1 of 1. However, the remaining unbanned one is on HFB's account, so that one can also be considered lost forever, and so on and so forth. And with the current supply of these things, it is safe to assume that they will remain one of the rarest knives in the game, and possibly in the future will become the rarest knife in the game. Next up is the more boring but still incredibly rare StatTrak Factory New Fortis DD-pad knives. Now most people just meme on these knives and say that they are one of the worst finishes in the game and look the other way. Whilst in my opinion they are not wrong, there is one Fortis DD-pad type of knife that is very hard to get and can be a subtle flex, the StatTrak Factory New Fortis DD-pad. Even though these knives have been around forever, since the very first weapon case up until the fracture case, there is a shockingly low supply of these Fortis knives in StatTrak Factory New conditions. For instance, during this entire period when these knives were available to unbox, there are only 7 butterfly knives in StatTrak Factory New, 4 gut knives, 3 karambits, and the other ones aren't really more plentiful either. So now some might consider those numbers to be good for such a rare item, but again you have to remember that these things were dropping in cases for around 6 years, so in that time frame to only unbox this many is quite underwhelming. But it isn't too surprising because just like the other knives on this list, the wear value for Factory New is horrid on these things, so the chances of unboxing one of these is the same 1 in 8,286,720 probability. So even though most couldn't care less about these Fortis DD-pad knives, these things are quite a collector's piece when it comes to scarcity. And that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the first part enough to give it a like and share, and hopefully I will release the second final part by the end of next week, as I am going to be away before that. I'm JKN, showing you that your Battle Scar Gut Knife Rust Coat isn't so special. Peace out.